Hello, chapter 53, Pride and Prejudice. Let's go ahead and get started. Number one, when did Lydia say that they would meet again? She said not 2 or 3 years, perhaps. Lydia's attitude in this particular section has always just irked me, to be very honest with you. Mrs. Bennet was very frustrated. She's losing one of her children, right? So, oh my dear, when shall we meet again? Oh, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years perhaps. Write to me very often, my dear, Mrs. Bennet says. As often as I can, but we married women have never much time for writing. My sisters may write to me because they will have nothing else to do. It just shows how full of herself she is and how unwilling she is to take any responsibility or see any of the misbehavior of her action. Number two, what is the meaning of Mr. Bennet's statement? I defy Sir William Lucas himself to produce a more valuable son-in-law. Wickham is an idiot, and so is Mr. Collins. So Mr. Bennet is saying, I have just as much of an idiot of a son-in-law as Sir William Lucas does. By Charlotte marrying Mr. Collins, Charlotte still had respectability. Lydia does not have respectability with marrying Mr. Wickham. So Mr. Bennet is saying, I won that deal, basically. My son-in-law is a bigger loser than Sir William Lucas is. Number three, why was Mr. Bingley coming back to Netherfield? Oh, why is he coming back? You and I know why he might be coming back. Wink, wink. The housekeeper at Netherfield received orders to prepare for the arrival of her master, who was coming down in a day or two to shoot for several weeks. It was a hunting party. That's all it was. It was a hunting party. Number four, when was he coming? In 2 days, sorry. He was coming down Thursday at the latest, very likely on Wednesday, however. Number five, why was Elizabeth certain Mr. Bingley still had feelings for Jane? Had she not spoken to him in Derbyshire, she might have supposed him capable of coming there with no other view than what she had the knowledge of. But she still thought him partial to Jane because I keep getting texts from people, sorry. She knew how he felt about Jane. He had basically implied numerous times when they were at Pemberley that he was still thinking about Jane. So she knew that he wasn't just going to come and go shooting. There was definitely a reason, because he could go to somebody else's house and go shooting. Number six, describe Mr. Bennet with regards to Bingley coming back into the neighborhood. Mrs. Bennet says, as soon as ever Mr. Bingley comes, my dear, you will wait on him, of course. So Mrs. Bennet's like, you're going to go say hi to him, right? And Mr. Bennet's like, no, you forced me into visiting him last year and promised if I went to see him, he should marry one of my daughters, but it ended with nothing, and I will not be sent on a fool's errand again. So Mrs. Bennet was frustrated. Mr. Bennet was just trying to get her goat, which he obviously did a good job of. Number seven, what was Mrs. Bennet mortified to know? She was mortified to know that the Mrs. Longs, that Mrs. Long and the Lucases and everybody else would call on Mr. Bingley before the Bennets did. So that was mortifying for her to imagine. Question number 8. See, we get through these really fast when we're not in class to have discussions on them, right? Number 8, who does Mrs. Bennet hate the very sight of? Mr. Darcy. She hates the very sight of Mr. Darcy. Oh, I've got a little bump. Sorry. Because I was trying to do something funny with my hair, but never mind. Never mind. I'll just let it ride and you guys will just pretend you don't see it. I appreciate that. She hates the very sight of Mr. Darcy. Number 9, why did Elizabeth have sources of unease? Because she knew. It says Elizabeth had sources of unease which could not be suspected by Jane, to whom she had never yet had the courage to show Mrs. Gardner's letter or to relate her own change of sentiment towards him. So Elizabeth feels very nervous with Darcy in the room, number 1, because she knows that he paid for everything. She knows that he saved her family, and her mom is going to be a complete wench to Darcy when Darcy's the one that gave Lydia respectability, that gave the family back respectability by paying for everything for Lydia. And so Elizabeth was mortified by this, but she also was mortified because she couldn't tell Jane that. And her feelings for Mr. Darcy had changed, but she hasn't told Jane that either. And so she's just completely embarrassed and she feels just verklempt. She doesn't know what to do. Number 10, what was her astonishment of him coming to Netherfield and Longbourn equal to her astonishment at his coming and voluntarily seeking her again was almost equal to what she had known on first witnessing his altered behavior in Derbyshire. She was shocked, almost as shocked as when she came around the corner and there he was at his estate. Let's look at number 12. Whose presence could Darcy not be the same as in number 11. Not only did Jane look a little paler, but also, but more sedate. She looked more sedate than usual, meaning she was much more mellow than she normally was. And of course she was. She didn't trust Mr. Bingley. She'd already given him her heart once. She didn't want to give her heart again and have him just stomp all over her. Number 12. Whose presence could Darcy not be the same as in Mr. Gardner's company? He could not be the same in Mrs. Bennet's company because she made him nervous. Mrs. Bennet made Darcy on edge, where Mr. Gardner and Mrs. Gardner were genteel people, so he felt very comfortable around them. Number 13, why was Elizabeth so hurt and distressed by Mrs. Bennet's treatment of Darcy? Because Elizabeth knew. She knew everything. She knew he was a good man. She knew that he was wonderful. She knew that he had paid for Lydia, and Elizabeth was humiliated for her mother because her mother was treating once again Darcy like trash, and the mother, Mrs. Bennet, owed Darcy so much. Number 14, and I am on chapter 54, right? 14. Oh, she was also, Elizabeth, back to 13, Elizabeth was also disappointed and angry with herself for having at one point expressing her bad opinions of him so long ago. She was angry for having hoped. Also, another reason she was angry at herself because she was hoping that he would show up and be more attentive to her and act like he liked her, like he was acting at Pemberley when they met earlier this summer, and he wasn't. And so she was mad at herself because she knew he was never going to give her that attention anymore because of Wickham. 14, how did Bingley now find Jane? He found her as handsome as she had been last year, as good-natured and as unaffected, though not quite so chatty. Jane was anxious that no difference should be perceived in her at all and was really persuaded that she talked as much as ever. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 53. Hopefully you will have gleaned something from this, and we will move on to chapter 54.